quoted a popular theme in that politics is who gets what, when, and how. Now, excuse me, when the Cliff Note version of the book talks about the decision makers, it's important to define who are the decision makers. Well, normally the decision makers regarding criminal law are the President of the United States along with Congress. At the state level is normally the governor and the state legislatures. Not to forget the head of the law enforcement agency for that state, because the head of the law enforcement for the particular state are often appointed by governors, legislatures, etc. And then, of course, you have the local level, and you have a lot of mayors that pass ordinances along with town councils. So those are all the decision makers when it comes to issues surrounding criminal law and the passing of criminal statutes, ordinances, or regulation, which we will talk about. So first, it's important to note that in the federal judiciary, judges are appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate. And those federal judges serve lifetime terms, unless they do something egregious, which is very rare. They serve the judiciary system for lifetime appointments. And one of the things that is important when we look at federal judges, including Supreme Court justices appointed to the United States Supreme Court, they are often appointed according to the political party that they have been associated with. Like we discussed in module number 1, political ideology is very important when it comes to appointing federal judges, because the federal judge or United States Supreme Court justice is normally associated with the political party that is in power at the particular time that he or she is appointed. Just adjusting the light here for a minute. And so they owe their allegiance or their loyalty, although they're supposed to be separate and distinct from a political party because they were a judge. They usually come from a background that supports the government, the chief executive officer that appoints them, their ideology. And normally here in the United States, like I talked about before in Module 1, it's a two-party political system. You have the Democrats, which normally have a more liberal background and usually place a premium on individual rights. And then you have the Republicans, who are a little bit more conservative and more friendly towards law enforcement, more in favor of passing laws that are quote-unquote tough on crime. So those are the two different philosophies that often come into play when it comes to political appointments for judges. In some states, judges are not appointed by the governor, but they are elected. And that carries a whole nother ideology. And normally the judges that are elected in those positions obviously reflect the political ideology of the majority of citizens that live in that particular jurisdiction where they are elected. So let's begin with looking at how politics affects policing, because politics definitely does affect policing in a couple of different ways. Number one, police chiefs are normally appointed, again, by the chief executive of that particular jurisdiction. If it's a city, normally it's a mayor, maybe in conjunction with the town council or city council. Towns, they're usually appointed by a mayor. And at the state level, normally they're appointed by the governor of the state at that particular time. And depending on how the particular jurisdiction appoints the chief law enforcement officer for their towns, cities, or states, normally they serve at the discretion of the particular chief executive officer. Although here in Connecticut, a police chief, once he is appointed, may not be removed for anything that is not considered just cause. That is not the same throughout the United States, and again, in many jurisdictions, it's based upon the discretion of the chief executive officer of the jurisdiction. Similarly with the states, usually the head of a state police agency is appointed by a governor, and if a new governor comes in, a new person is put in charge. At the federal level, of course, the U.S. Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer for the federal government, and he or she, currently Attorney Holder, is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. So how does their political ideology affect the police officer on the street? Well, normally the chief law enforcement officer of a particular organization has his or her own set of ideology. What type of policing concept are they going to follow? Is it going to be the community-based policing model? Is it going to be problem-oriented police department model? Or is it based on the predictive model of policing, which we will discuss later in another module? So that ideology of that particular law enforcement officer is often trickled down through supervision techniques, through putting out policies as to how officers are to enforce criminal laws. And of course, as we know, individual officers have their own sense of discretion, as you may have learned through other courses, as to how strictly they're going to enforce certain laws, such as motor vehicle violations or criminal statutes. Police officers have an extraordinary amount of discretion as to who they're going to arrest and those types of decisions. However, those officers are accountable to the supervisors of those particular police departments. And certainly, if an officer is not using his or her discretion appropriately, that would be addressed by the higher-ups in the police department. Moving along as to how politics affects prosecution. Again, it varies from state to state, but in many states, such as in the local area here, Massachusetts and New York, employ the chief DA, district attorney model. And the chief district attorney is normally elected, and therefore his or her allegiance is directly related to the community that supported them and that elected them. So they're very accountable to the public because usually they serve terms, and if the public is not satisfied with the way that the prosecutions were handled in a particular area, they simply choose not to re-elect them to service. So the prosecution in those particular areas have to, although they are independent, they are very accountable to their community. They are the chief law enforcement division of the particular area. For instance, here in Connecticut, our state's attorney, the chief state's attorney, is appointed by the governor for 8-year terms. Usually he or she is reappointed after the 8-year term, but there have been times in Connecticut here where the chief state's attorney has been replaced by the governor and actually a commission, that is commission members that are appointed by the governor. So the prosecution also has their own set of ideology based on their political backgrounds and beliefs, and set the tone for what crimes will be prosecuted in a particular manner. Here in Connecticut, we have a state's attorney's office that's divided into 12 judicial districts, and each judicial district has their own state's attorney that is in effect in charge of that particular jurisdiction. And frequently the state's attorney sets the tone as to how aggressive a prosecution of different offenses will be prosecuted. So whether it's an elected prosecutor or whether it's a appointed prosecutor, he or she is greatly affected by the political system and is either accountable to a governor or is accountable to his or her public that have elected them. The court also talks about judicial decision making. Similarly, at the local level for judges that are not appointed by the federal government, but state judges are frequently appointed by the governor with the consent of the state senate, and they have a committee that determines whether or not they should be confirmed, and then it's put out to the general senate to confirm or deny the appointment of the judge. So therefore, especially here in Connecticut, judges are very accountable to the governors that they are appointed by. They're normally appointed by the governor that that particular judge is related to as far as their party affiliation. And although once they take office, they are not supposed to be influenced by politics, their political ideologies coming in as a judge will frequently determine how that particular judge will sentence offenders. Will they be the type of judge that will give somebody the maximum sentence, or will they be the type of judge that will always be more at the lower end of what is called for in a statute? Those judges, although, like I said, they are not supposed to be influenced any longer by the people that appoint them, their initial ideology has much to do, in their former party affiliation has much to do with the way that the particular judge is going to sentence individuals. Or when there's a search and seizure issue, are they a conservative judge that's going to afford the police greater liberties, or are they more of a liberal judge that is going to really determine whether or not there was any type of police misconduct, or not even misconduct, but is there enough probable cause for the signing of a search warrant or an arrest warrant? Although, like I said, the judges are not supposed to be influenced by those particular parties at that point once they're a judge, it's difficult for a judge not to follow his or her personal ideology that is assimilated with some particular political party. The last thing that is discussed in the Cliff Note version is the stymie, politics by stymie, and this happens a lot of times when federal judges are being appointed, where the Senate will delay voting on a particular judge in the hopes that the legislative session runs out, or widespread debate as to whether or not the judge should even be confirmed. So much like Professor Rafferty talked about in Module 1 of this delaying tactic to sometimes pass to vote on a judge, or to vote on a new criminal law or policy that's going to affect the criminal justice system. So that's a basic overview of politics and criminal law.